had a nice run of cards recently. Cards like Headpool and Moira X coming into their own in Destroy builds, the Zombie Horde archetype getting buffed to the point that I would consider it one of the better decks in the game right now. I suppose it makes sense that there might be a dud among them, and I think we may have gotten to it. Zombie Captain Marvel is very mid. Now, I want to be clear. When I say mid here, I don't mean bad, I mean mid. This card still does things that very few other cards are going to be able to do. She is still a unique card that has some interesting interplay. She does some reasonably strong things as well. But I think that if you're focused purely on input of tokens and output of win rate, this is not a card that is going to appeal to you in a meaningful way. What this card is meant to do is very interesting, just as a baseline concept for a card. It's a high complexity card. Her activate ability, again at 4 cost, and that is notable, is that she destroys the other cards at her location and moves to a location where you are losing. Now, there are a couple of wrinkles to that ability that make her worse than you might think, because at first glance, you might look at that and say, that seems really cool. But the wrinkles to that ability are where it is different from an actual Captain Marvel ability. And that is what's really important here. First of all, the activate is tied to the ability. It's not like it'll wait until your opponent reveals their cards on turn 6. It'll look at the locations on turn 6 when you activate it, or on turn 5 when you activate it. In other words, this is not a card that has the Captain Marvel vision of winning whatever lane you're losing. It'll just move to one you're losing at the time you activate it. That might not actually be where you need it. This means that very often what you're doing with this card is trying to make sure that you're losing the lane that you actually need it to get in, and you can make that happen fairly reasonably with things like face down cards. Again, the timing of the activate does matter, priority does matter, who's revealing first, who's not revealing first. All of that is a relevant piece of how this card plays out. But largely, what sticks out the most about this card is that if you are losing at 2 locations, it can choose a full one, try to move there, and not go to the other one. So if you have a full location that you are losing, there is a 50% chance that it'll try to go to that location and not go to the other location that you left a space in. That's notably pretty bad for this card working how it says. And I'm not sure that's actually going to continue to hold up, but it is something that is relevant to know about this card right this second. It will not move unless it has an actual place to go to, and if there are multiple potential losing locations, it doesn't check to see if one of them is full before trying to move there. Now, the other things that stick out about make this card pretty clunky are the fact that it's a 4-cost activate. We've done 4-cost activates a lot. They have very rarely been good. The one actual exception to this is, of course, Omega Sentinel, who is a 4-cost activate that asks literally nothing else of you. And I think that's a really important note. The other 4-cost activates, cards like this, or cards like the Spider that clones itself, that is asking something of you. There's a secondary quest attached to that. That secondary quest is, in the case of this, get a bunch of things you want to destroy on that location. And in the case of the Spider, it is get it as big as possible. So when you clone it, it actually matters. There is no secondary quest to Omega Sentinel, and I think that's part of why of all of the 4-cost of these versions of 4-cost activates, she's the one that sticks out as an actual card people play. It also is notable that she's the one that goes best with Jocasta, the best Jocasta payoff card in the entire game. That makes perfect sense, too, as a good reason why she sees play. I think largely cards like this and Scarlet Spider, whose name I finally remembered a minute into this monologue, are cards that really don't necessarily just fire and forget. They're cards that are 4-cost activates and are also asking you to do other stuff. And I think that at this point has been roughly untenable for a competitive level card. And I don't mean to say that these cards are unplayable or terrible. Every card in Marvel Snap is honestly pretty good. It's pretty hard to make a card that is actively really bad. But I do think that what you have to do when you evaluate cards is say, is putting this in my deck making my deck better or making my deck worse compared to other things that I could be putting in my deck? And there are very few situations in which I can honestly say that I felt like putting this card in my deck was making my deck better in a one-to-one swap with something else in a similar destroy-related space, and going out of my way to be a Zombie Captain Marvel deck perhaps made my deck worse by even more cards than that. But that's not to say that this card is unplayable or that her decks are unplayable. I think they're actually pretty reasonable. I did pretty okay with all the Zombie Captain Marvel decks I played. A couple of them were even pretty good, but she was not a major factor in really any of the things that I was doing in a way that another card could not replicate. And that is usually a bad sign if you want to go purchase a card. This was the most successful mid-range list that I played with Zombie Captain Marvel, and I think you'll see a couple of through lines in Zombie Captain Marvel lists that make her fairly reasonable and fairly useful. Thing you're going to see a lot of is Sentry and the Hood, and there's just going to be, for fairly obvious reasons, a large amount of that. Then the question becomes, if I am playing this sort of destroy-focused mid-range, what is it that I bring to the table that a Victoria hand in the similar space would not bring? And largely what you bring is relatively less vulnerability to tech cards like Enchantress and things of that nature. You also get to bring in a fairly reasonable interaction package. And I think largely when you look at this deck, which I got from Jay Walla, the Cerebro main actually, it doesn't start with Zombie Captain Marvel, it starts with the cards that are used to be interactive. Juggernaut, Shadow King, and Lady Deathstrike. This puts it in a very similar space to the Victoria hand list that Cougar played that I really liked on my last tier list, except instead of their Cosmic Ghost Rider, we have a Lady Deathstrike that we can use for additional upside, getting rid of various things. This feels like the closest Zombie Captain Marvel has gotten to an actual deck, but it also feels like I'm not really sure that I need her to be doing what this deck is doing. The baseline stuff that this deck is doing is generally stronger than her. I would much rather polymorph my Void than blow it up with Zombie Captain Marvel. And that's not to say that she's bad. She's obviously a fairly reasonable and powerful thing to be doing. But this deck is really leaning on her being something that she isn't, and she is fine. I think there's nothing wrong with her in this deck. I think this is the best deck you can play with her, to be completely honest with you. I really like what this deck is doing. I think it's relatively well positioned. It's in a solid space, being a Merlin werewolf deck with a bunch of legitimate output into it. It's fairly similarly put together to the zombie decks that I really like right now, also Merlin werewolf decks. There are cool things that you can do, but the weaknesses of Zombie Captain Marvel are prominent here. And what I mean by that is you are very stuck on energy a lot of the time. And you are very stuck on dudes on the board a lot of the time because Merlin is kind of getting rid of some of them. Your destroy cards are kind of getting rid of some of them. And you end up just sort of looking at this deck and saying, is this the best card I could play here? And I think with a couple of changes, she might honestly be. Like if she had the Captain Marvel ability of moving to where win you the game, that's really cool. But right now, without that, it's just like, all right, well, I could just play a Mercury and that would be more useful to me when Sanctum Sanctorum shows up. There's a lot going on with this card and with this deck that I think is worth investigating. Again, like this deck was real. It was a good enough deck. It had enough interaction, enough powerful things going on that I felt like I was fairly confident playing it as a solid mid-rangey deck at like a 51.2% win rate or whatever you want to call it. I would feel fairly confident having relatively consistent results with this. But is that the most I can get out of a Merlin Werewolf shell? I think there's probably something else I could be doing with Merlin Werewolf in this kind of shell to make it a little bit stronger. Now, I do think, again, that this is the best I have had this card feel. It was legitimately powerful, and I was doing legitimately normal power levels of Marvel Snap things. So I don't want people to come into this and see that this card is absolute garbage, unplayable, trash, bleh. It's not. It's just also not worth going out of your way to do because there are plenty of things that I think can get to this level of performance. That's my take on her right now. This list is in an extremely similar space. You look at what's going on here and you're like, okay, I get it. this is cool. We're doing some legitimately interesting and cool things here. There's real power in here. This is a good Merlin werewolf shell. The Dormammu is shockingly functional, right? Like, one of the cool things about this deck is that you get to do like a final turn sentry, which spawns a void on the right, and then you use that void as fodder for the 2-cost Dormammu spell to summon him. That's awesome. It's super dope. It's really cool. And she conflicts with that because you want to be using her to eat the sentry stuff. Like, this is the thing that you keep running into with this card for me, is like, I think that generally speaking, she can go in decks that win, but I am very unconvinced that she makes those decks win more. When you ask me what makes this deck good, the easy answer is Hood Misery. You would rather be doing that than blowing it up with Captain Marvel. You would rather be using your Sentry Void to fuel a Dormammu to be one of the final 2 sacrifices than you would eat it with Captain Marvel. She's there as like your plan C in a bunch of stuff. And as a plan C, I'm not entirely convinced she's better than Carnage. So I do think it's nice that you have access to her, because unlike Carnage, she doesn't have to do anything. But the downside of playing her when she doesn't have to do anything is that you have played a 4/4. I think largely when I look at a deck like this, what the card needs to be more functional here is either a more accurate to Captain Marvel text line or just some more power. The other thing that really sticks out about her when you play her a lot is you sometimes just really wish she could stay where she was. And that is where the more accurate to Captain Marvel thing I think would really pay off. Like, if she's moving out of a lane and it's losing you the lane, that's not helping you in a meaningful way. And it can actually be very harmful depending on the way priority is set up in the game. Because if you activate her and then she's like, haha, I'm going to save you, let's leave this lane. And then they play stuff on the lane that she's at and you're just like, oh, cool. And then they play stuff on the lane she moved to that's bigger than her. And you're just sitting there looking at like, okay, well, she definitely just lost me that game. That kind of stuff happens enough that it doesn't feel great pressing the button all of the time. A lot of my time with this card was tanking on like, am I pressing the button here? Because there's this mini game that happens with you and your opponents where they think you're going to press the button, so they invest as if she's going to leave. And then if you don't press the button and you leave the stuff there, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe we actually win. Maybe there's like fill up every other location so she can't leave. And then she wins the location that she's on. There's like play to this card that is interesting, and I think that ultimately it just ends up a little bit underpowered as a 4-cost activate with only 4 power to end up having all of these sort of like little detractions from her win the game ability. I've seen some interesting stuff with her in Morgan lists. The idea is basically that you end up going and getting her and then using her on 5 into a revealed Morgan, that kind of stuff. I'm not sure it's worth the loss of Airwalker consistency, but I think that argument could go both ways. I'm generally a fan of these kinds of decks. I'm a big Moira X guy. I'm a big head pool guy. But what I'm not a fan of is playing them on the day of Destroy card releases, because you're just going to run into people playing Null and you're going to feel stupid because they're playing Null and Killmonger because they're playing a deck that they built around this new card, and you're going to feel really dumb about it. So this is more of a like keep an eye on this kind of inclusion in this list, because I think right now, specifically now, as people are playing with this new card, anything that's doing Destroy stuff in a small way, especially if it's doing enough Destroy stuff to discount a death, is going to feel really stupid when it gets null death on the final turn of the game by people who just chucked Captain Marvel into a normal Destroy deck. Speaking of chucking Captain Marvel into a normal Destroy deck, you are legally allowed to do it, although I can't say I recommend it. You can do it. This is a deck that is built as much towards Captain Marvel as could possibly be responsible to do. The inclusion of Bucky Barnes and Wolverine, it's like we're back in 2023. And it's okay. Like, it's not the greatest card of all time, but you can do some really interesting mid-rangey stuff in your games where you're not super nutting off that allow her to be fairly reasonable as a Destroy card. It's not the greatest on Earth, though, because a lot of your good draws involve playing a Destroy card on 4, replaying a Deadpool and a Destroy card on 5, and taking a turn off of that to get Zombie Captain Marvel on the board where she can destroy stuff. That typically ends up limiting your ceiling. Again, not a bad card, but definitely not one I would view as a requirement to go play Destroy. And if you don't have a card that makes the cut in the best 12 of Destroy that says Destroy on it, it's hard for it to make the cut elsewhere, I think. Nimrod is a fairly interesting inclusion for this card because there are some interesting lines here. Like, obviously, when you're doing like Shuri, Nimrod, Boom Boom, she's not the greatest card in the world. You'd rather be doing the Shuri stuff in almost every single case. But there's some really interesting Galactus mix-ups that you can do. Like, if, for example, you have a Nimrod in her location, you can activate that Nimrod, move her, or you can activate the Captain Marvel, move her out of that location with priority, presumably, which would then allow you to reveal the Galactus that you put down on that location. These kinds of little mini games are interesting with her. She's definitely not bad. She's just not better than Shuri. I think she's a pretty solid 4 here. It's just that when you're doing your Nimrod stuff, you would generally rather be going tall with it, barring specific things that you're worried about, like, say, I'm worried about a Cosmo or a Cosmic Ghost Rider or something that interacts with my Nimrod really fast. I'm worried about getting Juggernauted off my Nimrod lane, so I'm not going to go for the Shuri and the Activate. I'm just going to, like, try to get my power out there as much as possible. There are situations in which she represents what I would describe as your safe option with Nimrod. And I think that's notable. Like, it is also a little bit more beatable than a typical Nimrod boom boom angle, but it is notable that you have this access to like second kind of bad Kid Omega that allows you to do stuff like this. Is it the greatest thing of all time? Not really, no. But it is a different angle than this deck has had access to. I would believe it if you told me that she was the 3rd best 4 cost for this deck in terms of point output, and maybe better than that in terms of dodging common interaction that is bad for you. Like, let's say you're worried about Shadow King. You don't want to be stacking Shuri on Nimrod. You don't want to be doing any of that stuff. You might want to go for, like, let me just fill up every lane with Nimrods. It's going to be 24 power everywhere. I've got the Carnage. I've got the Venom. It's going to be fine. That seems like a plausible use case for her to me, but I don't know that that's a permanent role that she'll occupy. I think it's like a reasonable space for her, though, for sure. So what is the final verdict on Zombie Captain Marvel? Well, I can't say that I think she's out there and worth buying. I think she's not very good. I do think that the mid-range decks with her are like at least playable, and the stuff she does in other spaces is like you're not going to be like, oh, I paid a bunch of money. This isn't Elixir. You didn't buy a card that actually actively sucks. You just bought a card that has a lot of competition and is a little too finicky. And that's not to say that this is a permanent state of affairs either. But if you did buy this card, I would highly suggest giving that Jay Walla deck a tryout. I enjoyed it a great deal, but it is very like my speed of grindy mid-range that requires some discipline against decks you don't have meaningful interaction for. So do keep that in mind when you do play it. I think it's a little better than people are willing to give it credit for. Like, that deck specifically felt like the only deck I played with her that I was actually happy with, whereas other versions of the mid-range deck with Captain Marvel sort of felt like I would rather just be playing the zombie deck at this point. This is a reasonable enough card, but she's not. The fact that she is a 4-cost activate means that she just has to be a little better than she is. There are too many things that stack on top of like bad interactions with her that make her worse than she could or should be. This is a card that I think genuinely has some real power attached to it, but enough of the way that she works is bad for winning games that you just don't really want to invest in her. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one. Have a wonderful evening. And for those of you that bought Zombie Captain Marvel, really do check out the first and last decks in this video. I think those are probably the ones that I would play. If you're looking for weekend mission decks, those are definitely the ones I would play. Have a wonderful evening. Remember to like and subscribe. I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I think I've said all the things I say at the end of the video. Have a great evening. I said it 3 times. I don't really know what I'm doing at this point. I'm kind of just vamping. I'm going to end the video here.